All right. Good morning, good afternoon, evening, everyone, depending on where you're calling in from or where you're watching from. My name is Colin Eddy. I'm the events assistant with conveners.org. I'm just going to go into a very quick introduction of who we are and what we do, and then I'm going to pass things over to our facilitator, Gretchen. So we are a small but mighty team located all over the globe. I'm in Canada. I split my time between Canada and Spain. Sarah Sterling is in Guatemala. Ray splits his time between the US and Portugal. So we are a fully virtual team. We've always been a fully virtual team. So if anyone has any questions about how to manage and make the most out of operating a virtual team, you can certainly reach out to us. We're happy to share any lessons that we've learned and any knowledge that we might have. Conveners.org is a 501c3 nonprofit based out of the US, but we are a global membership community. It's a community of people who are just passionate about making impact or bringing people together to create impact in some way, shape, or form. So that can look like impact investors, impact investor networks, accelerator programs, event organizers. We have, some leadership coaching and mentorship services. So we're a really, really diverse community of people. We also have an advisory services branch, which is sort of the consulting arm of Conveners, where we do a lot of one-on-one work with large foundations and organizations on how to achieve their convening goals. By any means, if anyone has any questions or anyone watching is not a member and is interested in becoming one, you can certainly reach out to me. My email is colin@conveners.org. You can also reach out to Sarah Sterling, who is normally on these calls with me, but not today, at sarah@conveners.org. So without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Gretchen Key-Steidel. She is the founder of Circles for Conscious Change, and she's going to be leading us through this discussion today. So take it away, Gretchen.
Thank you, Colin. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. It is a pleasure to be back. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share more about this critically important topic for our particular realm of work, which is managing stress and building resilience. So let me just introduce myself. I come representing, in a sense, two organizations. For the last 17 years, until the end of last year, I was the founder, well, I am the founder, but was the president of Global Grassroots, and I'm still on the board. And Global Grassroots has been working over those nearly 2 decades in East Africa with women, local women entrepreneurs who are in the process of designing their own nonprofits to bring them mind, body, trauma healing work, mindfulness-based leadership skills, and both the social venture planning tools and seed funding so that they can advance their own solutions in their own communities. So we've been doing a lot of the work that I'm going to be sharing with you has come from the actual practical experience that we've had working in these spaces with especially women who are survivors of war and genocide and chronic violence. And now I'm moving in a new direction. Circles for Conscious Change is really about focusing on this intersection of personal well-being, personal growth, and personal transformation, and how that intersects with the ways in which we go about leadership and social change in the world. And so this topic in particular today is of deep passion and interest for me, and that I hope I'll be able to share some very valuable and useful skills that will benefit you as well. So before we dig in, I just want to start by asking everyone to take a second and reflect for themselves on why you're showing up here today. And within your own life, and that may be your personal life or your professional life or both, what might be keeping you from flourishing? What tensions are there? What other obstacles exist from a full and thriving sense of well-being? So give yourself just a second to jot down a few notes for yourself. And for those who are here with me right now today, as opposed to watching this later, feel free to add into the chat some of your thoughts as to what brought you to this workshop today as well. So we have a few thoughts. Stress that comes from so much going on, the need to be able to stay focused in that kind of context. Any other thoughts? Biting off more than we can chew, balancing stakeholder needs. We obviously are juggling a tremendous amount. And so this sort of segues and is already answering the question, is why is this important for leaders and for all of those working in the social change sector? So again, make a few notes for yourself, because I think a lot of this entire field of work approaches well-being often as a luxury that we don't have time for, that it's something we might do when and if we get enough time, as opposed to the essential contributing factor to our personal sustainability in this work. And so as it relates to you, why do you think well-being and resilience is critically important to support your work? And feel free to add anything to the chat that you might like. Or just make some notes for yourself. Okay. So in general, as was noted in our chat, everyone has stress and anxiety in general. And yes, there's some great notes here. If you're stressed out, it makes it hard to encourage others not to be. We need to be models in the ways in which we lead. And yet it's really hard to dedicate time and effort to others if you're not able to take care of yourself. And so my objectives for this conversation today, by the time we're done with our 75 minutes we have left, is that you'll be in a better position to recognize more quickly your own coping mechanisms for stress so that you can catch yourself, that you'll be able to increase your own capacity to invest proactively in self-care so that you don't reach those levels of stress and anxiety. And we'll do that by building our awareness with frameworks for how we can shift from this culture of self-sacrifice and burnout to one of resilience and well-being. We will undertake a deeper understanding of our stress system, our nervous system, and I hope you'll walk away with a toolkit of evidence-based skills for grounding, for mindfulness, for resilience that you can use on a daily basis, as well as a self-care plan that will support you in mental, emotional, and physical well-being that you can initiate whenever you feel yourself kind of beginning to go out of balance. So this is what I hope that you'll be able to walk away with today. Does that sound good? So the way we're going to do this is in two parts. The first is really coming to an understanding, what do we mean by well-being and resilience, and how does it work, and how right now are we wrestling with stress in our lives so that we understand what drives our imbalance and what's actually happening physiologically. And then for the second half, we'll get into the depths of practice, and why do practices, mind-body practices, mindfulness in particular, and a particular breath practice that I'm going to share with you, how does that help us reset the nervous system, and how is that going to help support us in staying in balance and recognizing when we need to invest in ourselves? So let's dig into part one. And for those of you on the call, feel free to jump in with a question as we go, or to note it in the chat. So a definition. So what's really interesting, a couple of years ago, I did a literature review on the research related to well-being and resilience, as well as a number of other forms of personal transformation, to understand how it related to our ability to create positive change in our lives and others. And what I found is that there was actually no real consensus on the definition for well-being. It's very much subjective, and it needs to be defined by each individual in terms of what they desire for oneself. But this was a pretty good general one for being able to consider what that state is that we're aspiring to, this state of often being with others, where human needs are met, where one can act meaningfully to pursue one's goals, and where one enjoys a satisfactory quality of life. Of course, there are innumerable variables that feed into this, from our personal health to the context in which we're living to our sense of agency. But in general, this sense of I am experiencing a satisfactory quality of life as I define it. Now, resilience is a little different. And I love this definition because it speaks to resilience as a process. It's an ongoing thing of positive adaptation despite adversity. So we may have challenges with stress and anxiety, but we move through it over time and we learn how to adapt. We also grow with that experience. And what some researchers have found is that it is very much driven by this inner motivational force, one that is characterized by our own inner wisdom, our sense of self-actualization, our ability to be altruistic and find harmony within ourselves and with others. So it is driven and guided by a lot of these inner qualities that we can cultivate through working towards greater well-being and self-awareness. Now, why is this relevant? And I think most of you are probably already feeling why this matters to yourself, but there have been some really interesting studies of these various sectors that many of us spend most of our time in. And one study showed that nearly 3/4 of entrepreneurs have reported some mental health concerns. Sometimes less than half, but still very close to half of nonprofit, humanitarian, human rights, and others are reporting burnout, getting to the place of sheer and complete exhaustion. There was a wonderful study by the Wellbeing Project after initiating several cohorts of social entrepreneurs who went through 2 years of deep mindfulness. Some of it might have been mindful, but inner work and well-being work over time. And they found that it had a very significant impact on themselves, as well as the way that they led and worked with others. So on an individual level, they found they had a deeper sense of self, of presence, of an understanding of their own core values and purpose, and their ability to have a sense of compassion for themselves and a sense of their own power. And then on the other side of that, it was decreasing their levels of anxiety or anger, or judgment. And in particular, for those who are in leadership positions, they saw a reduction in their own fear of vulnerability and failure, which I thought was very powerful. And the way that that then affected the way that they led others is that they were able to build more positive relationships. The same level of self-compassion and curiosity they were bringing to themselves allowed them to judge less, react less, listen better. That helps them connect more and trust more. And knowing themselves more ensured that they could set effective boundaries, encourage others, collaborate more, and be more flexible because they weren't in these places of fear-driven responsiveness or reactivity. And that also affected their problem solving. Because they were more open-minded in these ways, they could see more diverse and creative possibilities because they valued well-being in themselves. They could build that within their organization, and they were more able to develop holistic approaches to solutions. And I think through that collaboration brings in the perspectives across many diverse perspectives of others. So it has benefit to all of us on a very significant professional level, but often we don't dwell there. Much of the time, I won't say most of the time, but much of the time we are coping with the ongoing stress of the circumstances that we are dealing with, both internally within our organizations and relationships with people within our organizations, and externally with the issues that we are addressing, and the challenges and the complexity of these major social issues and systemic work that we may be doing. And so I want to talk through this set of 16 stress coping mechanisms that are typical of those that are working in social purpose endeavors or service. This comes from the book Trauma Stewardship by Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky. And as I walk through them really briefly, make some notes to yourself about those that seem really familiar to you. It may be those that you've experienced before, or even those of coworkers or others, colleagues that you've seen in the work that you're doing. That's important for us to be aware of as an indicator of the well-being of our community and our organizations. So first, on this list is the sense of feeling helpless and hopeless, and that sometimes tends to set in, especially when we are dealing with chronic or major challenges within an institution or within a society that any one person could never be expected to shift. And so over time, we start to lose our inspiration and our optimism for what is possible. And that's very much related to number two, the sense that one can never do enough. That can be applied at any particular project or with any particular relationship or intractable issue, is this sense of very toxic sense of not enoughness. And the sense it can drive this orientation around, like, if we could only get this much more funding or replicate in scale in these certain ways, or just have this policy shift or whatever this may be, then we will get there. But we end up spending all of our time sort of grasping at what that is that we're seeking. And it also can lead to a sense of burnout over time and overwhelm. We can begin to experience hypervigilance, the sense that we are always putting out fires and we're waiting for whatever the next one is going to be. And that can affect our capacity for creativity, because we're so focused on whatever the next emergency is, or this overwhelming challenge, and multitasking and having to manage the needs of many others around us, that we don't even have the space to be creative anymore. And we begin with number 5 to move towards this very rigid black and white thinking and an inability to embrace complexity. We just sort of end up being inflexible around, like, no, this is it, or this is not it, and this is my agenda, and nothing else fits. And that can really minimize our capacity to solve problems collaboratively or sustainably. We may feel, number 6, that we may find ourselves minimizing. We may feel in the trenches that the challenges are so severe that anyone else that has any sort of minor challenge is just not worth our time or shouldn't be complaining about. And that can also affect the well-being of an organization or relationships outside of an organization, because we feel like there's this hierarchy to suffering, and there's only certain extreme cases that we're focused on, and everything else doesn't matter. 7, people start to feel a sense of physical manifestation of their exhaustion, chronic headaches, back pain, digestion issues. That may be one way that stress manifests for you. We may begin to feel like we can't talk to anybody unless they really get it. And so we shut certain people out because we just can't listen to them. And we feel the need to kind of avoid those kinds of exchanges. Sometimes people will even experience dissociative moments at the time that they're really overly stressed. These moments where you suddenly feel as if you are at another place in time, reliving something, just not attached, not sort of in the present moment. We may start to feel a sense of persecution, like others are out to get us if things are not going as well as we hoped. And that can kind of feed blaming of others. Or we may be overwhelmed with guilt. And this may be around certain privilege or certain circumstances of being in a different state of well-being than somebody else that you might actually be trying to help and assist. Or we may be overrun with fear, all of the what ifs that we're fighting against. That can bring on anger and cynicism, sort of the shadow side of anger. And our desire to sort of numb ourselves. We stop being able to empathize with others. And in extreme cases, it may also be followed by addiction of all forms. It could be food and exercise and work, as well as substances. And then this last one, this kind of the knight in shining armor syndrome, is this inflated sense of one's importance to their work. This sense that if I leave, everything will fall apart. And I think in a lot of cases, in places of leadership, people hold on in overly stressful circumstances to control things in ways that might not be necessary, might be holding things back from this particular sense that, I just either need to be in the middle of it or I need to be controlling it. So these are some of the extreme coping mechanisms that tend to happen in these kinds of fields, but we all have our own that we know if we really look at ourselves, the kinds of stress coping mechanisms that may seem a little more innocuous, things like, well, I just might have an extra glass of wine. I might just not sleep all the time. I might not be eating as healthy as I usually do when I have more time, or I give up my exercise, or whatever that might be. So take a second to make note of your own typical stress coping mechanisms. And, be honest with yourself. Sometimes the way you cope is healthy and sometimes it is not. Do you snap more frequently at people? Do you get frustrated more easily? Do you shut people out? Do you overshare? What are the kinds of things that you do to function, to soothe, or how does that affect the way in which you react or engage and relate to others? So make yourself a few notes on what that is. And the reason we want to be taking note of these kinds of things is that this becomes our signposts of when we're falling out of balance. And they may be very small. We feel like, no, I'm fine. It's no big deal. But they are the beginning of a pathway down out of balance on this slippery slope to a place that can lead to burnout. And so if we just know that when I get to that place where I just can't stop straightening the whole house, and that's either me trying to control everything or procrastinate or whatever that thing is that we do, then suddenly we are more self-aware that we're slipping into those patterns and we can be more proactive. So if you feel like adding to the chat some of the things that you typically do or things that you witnessed others doing, which is also just as valid as a way of recognizing when your college or organization might need space and time for greater well-being. So some things coming up include staying up later, snacking too much, doing both at the same time, shorter temper. Sometimes we binge watch something, or we don't get as much sleep as we need it. So as we have a sense of how we cope with it, I also want you to take a second to make a list of the things in your life that are causing you the most stress right now, or those things that you wish you could change. And you can keep on going with this list, but focus on the ones that feel like they hold the most tension for you. And as you are working on this list, I want you to notice how many of the things on your list are things you want, but you don't have yet. We want to change, your job circumstances, perhaps, if you could just get that new opportunity, things would be better. Or if you could just get that grant, or just get noticed by that entity, or whatever those things are that you want that you don't yet have. Alternatively, your list may be filled with things that you have that you don't want, a chronic back pain that you wish you didn't have, or, someone, a neighbor, that just makes your life miserable some days, whatever that thing is that you wish was just not part of your day-to-day life. Sometimes our stresses come from wanting to shift those things. And sometimes on our list are things we just have no capacity to change. They're out of our control, but they still cause us enormous stress. So before we go on and kind of looking at, okay, how do we work with all these things? I'm just going to open it up for any comments from and you can certainly put them in the chat, but any comments from our participants that might want to chime in about what they're noticing, what's a surprise to them. Maybe you've known this all along. Any observations so far in just examining, doing an audit of our stress and anxiety? There's some stress coming from just looking at the things that cause us stress. Yes, I am aware of that. We like to ignore this. All right. Well, let's talk about what is at the core of all of this. And we all want things to be different, right? At least I have yet to meet any one person who could say was and the worst the rest of it. Indeed. It's not always easy to compartmentalize. And so can we agree that we all want things to be different? Thing is that they often lead us down this path of imbalance in one side or the other, or like a pendulum, we kind of move back and forth. And if we can be aware of this falling to either side, then we can bring ourselves back into balance. So on the one hand, we want those things we don't yet have. And that can lead us into that kind of rigidity of like, I have to have this, it'll all be fine. Everything hinges on this one thing. And I'm sure we've all been in collaborative environments where there's someone who's not so collaborative, like I must have it, or this is the way we're going to do this. It's my way or the highway. And that sort of sense of grasping at things or needing to control or feeling like like we have to have things a certain way, this attachment side really brings us into a place of imbalance and can manifest in all those coping mechanisms that we saw already. The opposite side is called, and it's often the opposite side of the coin, is the detachment aversion side. We don't want what we do have. Like, this is too much. It's not my problem. I can't deal with it. It comes with a lot of fear and disillusionment, leading us to a place of burnout. Like I can't do this anymore. And we don't want to go in these two directions. We want to be in this place of balance. And that's where deeper levels of self-awareness and an investment in well-being are going to help us stay in this place of balance. And when we notice ourselves falling to either side, we can make a proactive effort to help us move back to a place of balance. When we're in this place, we can have an awareness and we have discernment about what is needed in any particular moment. Like, what is needed right now is I have to cancel that meeting, or what is needed right now is that I have to exercise more, drink more water, or make this strategic decision. But within that awareness of what is needed includes what is optimal for myself, not just a place of self-sacrifice or self-preservation, and also what is optimal for others. So we find that balance, a healthy balance, and it's not a charged tension, it's a knowing. And in this place, we don't have this, like, I can't care about this, it's too much, or I have to have it this way. We just have a sense of responsibility. Like, I care about this. It's not that everything depends on me, I have to do it, but no, I care. And I'm going to be guided by what I think is good or just or right or what's possible or my own inner values. But I'm going to go forward with a sense of balance in doing this. And sometimes that's going to require boundaries. And sometimes that's going to require curiosity and changes in myself and in what I'm working with. But we go with this space of greater willingness, ease, and curiosity. And whenever we feel that charge, like something's off, it is. And that's when we recognize it, we can work with what needs to happen next. So now we have a sense of like what's driving our stress. How does our body respond? So I want to just talk through a little bit about our nervous system and how that's going to shift with some of the practices I'm going to share with you next. Before I switch gears, does anyone have any comments, questions, or thoughts so far? Okay, so the nervous system. Our autonomic nervous system has two branches. One is called the sympathetic branch. This is our activating stress response system that is responsible for our capacity to survive, to be alert, to fight back when we have to, or to flee when we need to. And it is driven by the release of hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and often is accompanied by emotions of fear and anger. For the most part, in many of our societies and the fields that we're all working in, we are overly dominant in the sympathetic nervous system. We already are wired that way. Our primitive systems are wired to ensure that we're on guard, that like no prowling animal is going to jump out from a rock and attack us. So like we're already pre-wired, but we're even more so overly stimulating our sympathetic nervous system. The other side of the nervous system is the parasympathetic branch, and that's responsible for our rest, relaxation, and recharging. This is what restores us. And it's very much stimulated through the vagus nerve, which is this bidirectional pathway. There's many different nerve endings in our gut. It controls a lot of the visceral organs like heart, lungs, intestines, and it perceives whether we are safe or whether there is something to be concerned about from the external stimuli, and then it adjusts our system accordingly. It's also, when stimulated, responsible for the social engagement system, our feelings of being connected, our feelings of love and empathy, compassion, and are wanting to be more pro-social or more oriented to otherness and connection. And so naturally, when we're in the opposite sympathetic side, we are less capable of connecting and assessing safety as easily. Now, this is a diagram of a healthy nervous system. And usually we kind of have this pendulum that swings between the stress response system and the relaxation system. You know, you can imagine somebody comes up behind you and taps you on the shoulder and you jump. That's the stress response system. And then you know it's, oh, it's just my friend. And then you relax again. And so we move through this. We get aroused by something. We're on high alert. We settle. You know, we slam on the brakes and then we realize we're fine. And so we go through that. But over time, if we experience chronic stress, in addition to traumatic stress, so both traumatic and chronic stress, and even having witnessed significant traumatic event for somebody else, can affect our nervous system. And it can have a couple of different effects. One is it can become stuck on, where we are like on all the time. Our stress response system is always on. We're highly anxious and stressed, and we're in that like vigilant mode. And we can be extremely anxious, hyper aroused. We can't relax. We have a hard time sleeping. That also causes digestive problems and challenges sleeping, and even chronic pain. Or our system can be stuck off, almost like a battery that has been so depleted it can't recharge itself anymore. And that's where we have kind of the other kinds of symptoms where we just feel lethargic and completely exhausted, and we might sleep so much and we just can't connect with other people and begin to feel depressed. So whether or not you've experienced this to these extremes or not, often this is where chronic stress can lead us, or sometimes it's erratic, like we're responding in a way to things that is really oversized for what the circumstances are, or in a way that you wouldn't expect. And that is another sign that our stress response system is dysregulated. But the good news is that we can bring ourselves back into self-regulation. And many mind-body interventions, which we're going to have some time to practice in a minute, allow us to reprogram the stress response system. So different techniques, breathing techniques, meditation, mindfulness, certain forms of movement can help us begin to bring back online the parasympathetic or restorative side of our nervous system. And as we practice these, we get better at noticing what is happening inside ourselves, interoception. This, we notice more, you know, we're not overriding the fact that we're hungry because we're in a stress experience. We can notice our emotions. We can feel when we're getting charged and upset about something. And we begin to approach those experiences and sensations with less judgment and reactivity. And then we can begin to regulate ourselves better, take care of ourselves better, and we start to feel greater feelings of safety, which lead us to greater feelings of connection and compassion and even love. So we're now at the place of moving into the actual practice side of our time together. We've had a chance to get a sense of the definition of, you know, what do we even mean by well-being? What are our own coping mechanisms that are signposts for getting out of balance? What drives that imbalance? And how is the stress response system reacting? So let me pause and see if anyone has a question at this point. Is this resonating? Does this make sense as to how all the pieces fit together? All right, so let's go into part 2 and start exploring what some of this inner reflection work might do to help us. So what is mindfulness? In general, it can be a very simple definition, but not a very simple process. And the most commonly used definition is one of John Kabat-Zinn's that says that mindfulness is paying attention on purpose. So you're doing this with certain intention, on purpose in this present moment, but with this orientation of curiosity and non-judgment. So it's not just, oh, I'm feeling really angry right now. It's like, I'm feeling angry. That's really interesting. We're going to be paying attention, and you can pay attention to lots of things. You can pay attention to something you're doing, like breathing or washing dishes. You can pay attention to what you're feeling in your body, like a pain or a strange sensation in your gut when you're feeling nervous, or a headache, or a desire to get up and run. We can pay attention to our emotions. What is our mood in this moment? And I just got a flash of something. What is that? Or we can pay attention to our external environment, and we can just pay attention to whatever's happening without focusing on any one thing, which often allows to arise in us certain insights. There's many different kinds of practices that help build mindfulness. Why does this matter? Research has showed a tremendous number of benefits of mindfulness over time. On an internal level, personal level, we experience increased positive emotions over time, which involves a decrease in our anxiety, or that rumination where you're kind of running over and over in your head, like what you would have said if you could have that conversation again, or what you're going to write in that email. You begin to have decreases in that, as well as depression and stress. We're more capable of managing our emotions, so they don't just run away with us, but we can kind of feel and experience them and work with them instead of letting them drive us. We also have enhanced awareness, memory, attention capacities. It's even shown that it impacts aging and our immune system functioning. So many positive possibilities for ourselves. And then in the relational space, if we're more capable of knowing what's happening and regulating what's happening with us, then naturally we're going to be more present and aware and compassionate about what is happening for someone else. And so what ends up happening is that we are less on automatic pilot. We are more able to kind of what is called present moment integration, take in what is happening right now and respond to it consciously instead of always react to things without thinking. That means that it affects our emotional reactivity. We're not going to be as emotional as somebody else. That doesn't mean you don't feel emotion. It's just that it doesn't create reactivity in you that's not more conscious. And we can manage conflict with less anger. We have more flexibility in our responses. Instead of getting mad all of a sudden, we're more likely, we may feel anger, but then we may choose our words more carefully, and we can express ourselves more effectively. And so, of course, this is going to build better relationships and connections, which are valuable on all sorts of planes, and is going to help us understand ourselves and others better, which will benefit the way in which we work together and solve problems together. So with all of these benefits, why is it so hard? Mindfulness is hard for anyone who's had a chance to practice it. Turns out our default is that our minds are wandering nearly half of our waking hours. And in this Harvard study, people were found to be less happy when their minds were wandering. So we're not even present, but we're not happy about it either. And yet it's really hard to do. Mindfulness is a practice. It is also a state of being, and over time can become a trait in the ways in which we exist. But it does take practice. And so, but we need this because we have a lot on our plates, and we have to get up and we've got to keep going the next day. So how many in this group have actually had any experience with doing various mind, body, or mindfulness practices?
I've had a little bit. I've never been overly good at it, if I'm totally honest, but I have done a little bit of mindfulness.
Great. I see a few other people have too. Um, and the great thing, at least in my perspective of this practice, is there's no such thing as being good at it. We just practice and we observe what is unfolding for us. So I may be in a really balanced state one day where I feel like I could sit and be present with the birds singing all day long. And the next day, my head is a storm of past conversations and regrets and what I need to do next. And it all is. We're present with whatever it is. And we bring that sense of non-judgment and curiosity. So we can say, well, today I'm really distracted. What do I need? What does this have to tell me? And we can see how practices shift for us over time, how one practice might be different than another. And so I also every practice has different kinds of skills and intentions, but I want to start by saying, we go in with awareness, we try with some intention, and then we just notice. We don't have to judge like, I did that wrong or it's not working for me. We just simply are aware of whatever is happening. So let's try a couple of things. I want to lead us in a few practices. I want to talk about ways to integrate mindfulness and self-awareness in your everyday. And the reason for that is self-awareness will allow you to then make proactive choices for your well-being. I'll also talk through some grounding practices that allow us to really help when we're really getting carried away with things, to sort of come back in this moment, find a sense of calm and connection to the earth, which helps us reassess and find what we need to do next. I'm going to share with you a particular breathing practice called coherent breathing that my organization has been using with survivors of genocide to eliminate PTSD. And that has been used across the globe in many different circumstances to address trauma. And so naturally, if it can do that, it's very good for your own just stress management and relaxation. And then we'll end with building some self-care plans so that when we see those coping mechanisms, we can actually do something that we're more consciously choosing to bring us back into balance. All right. So let's start with a simple practice of noticing our breath. And what's wonderful is that our breath is with us in any moment, and it is accessible to our awareness, whether we are driving or in the emergency room or in our backyard. And so it's something that if we practice, it can always bring us into this very moment. So for those who haven't had formal meditation practice, we want to sit in a way that feels noble. And so this usually means our feet on the ground, or if we're sitting on the ground in some way, we're bringing our attention to our sitting bones on the ground or our feet on the floor. And we straighten our spine. You can imagine a string pulling you upward from the top of your head. And we want to sit in a way that balances our relaxation with our alert engagement. So we're not too relaxed or we're not too stressed, but we are aware and present as we sit. And if you feel comfortable, you may close your eyes. If you would rather not, you're welcome to just gaze downward at nothing in particular, just with like an unfocused gaze, so you're not getting distracted. And now there is no need to change your breath at all. Just bring your awareness to the way you are breathing in this moment. You might notice how deep your breath is or how shallow. You might notice the pace of your breathing, how fast or slow it is in this moment. And notice if you pause and where you pause. Sometimes we pause after we breathe in. Sometimes we pause after we breathe out. Notice the temperature of your breath. Notice if when you breathe in, whether that temperature is different than when you breathe out. Notice the sounds of your breathing. Notice any physical sensations of breathing. Maybe you feel the breath in your nostrils. Maybe you can feel it in the back of your throat. Notice how far you can feel your breath before it disappears. And notice how your body moves while you breathe. You can place a hand on your belly or on your chest and your ribs, your back. And as you breathe, just notice what parts of you move. And now you may have noticed your breath has changed since when you started. Just take note of any of those changes. And so now, when you feel ready, I will invite you to open your eyes and bring your attention back to this presentation, this workshop in our group. So, what did you notice that you'd never noticed before about your breathing? Does anyone have any observations? Sometimes our breathing is short and intense, or sometimes we're holding our breath and we never noticed it until the moment we bring our awareness back again. And there's a common, it's hard. It's hard to focus just on our breathing. More likely than not, our mind wanted to take over and bring us someplace else. And that's okay. We have the opportunity to say, nope, I'm coming back again. And here's what's really valuable to know about that. In this kind of focused attention practice, there are neural mechanisms that we are exercising in focusing on something. And there are neural mechanisms we are exercising in recognizing our mind is wandering and bringing our attention back again. And both are equally valuable to our self-awareness. And so the fact that your mind is exercising your focus is also okay. We don't have to only in every moment notice every single breath. I mean, the average person breathes something like 10,000 to 20,000 breaths a day. I mean, just imagine if you actually were aware of every single one of those. Perhaps that would be enlightenment. I don't even know how many we can reasonably be aware of in every day. But yeah, it's a practice we can do. And there's a reason why people are like, take a breath, it's right there. And slow, deep breathing, especially a very slow exhale, will stimulate the side of your nervous system, the parasympathetic branch that allows us to recharge. The simple act of taking a deep breath in and exhaling it very slowly a few times will benefit you. Any other observations? All right, so that's breath noticing, and that's available to you at any time and is a valuable practice to do even momentarily in moments of stress or at a very scheduled time every day. So we're going to do another practice now of noticing what I call our three centers, which many traditions see as three core centers. And that is noticing what's happening in our mind, noticing what is happening in our heart or our emotional state, and noticing what is happening in the body. So I'll invite you to sit in the way that we did just a moment ago, with your feet on the floor and your spine straight, your eyes cast downward or closed as you so choose. And we'll start just by taking 2 deep breaths. Help kind of cleanse the palate. And now let's bring our awareness to our bodies. And now when I said that, your attention might have gone to one place in particular. You might have noticed a pang of hunger or a pain or an itch. And let's also notice the parts of our bodies that we don't always experience. So, for example, can you feel the backs of your earlobes? Can you feel the space behind your eyes? Can you notice whether you're holding tension in your face and your jaw? If you can, notice if you have any tension in your neck and shoulders and along your spine. See if you can feel the space between your sternum and your spine. So the front of your body to the back of your body. And if you can't always feel these parts of your bodies, you can also imagine it. Imagine the space within you, the depth of you. And now feel into the width of you, from one shoulder to the other, from one hip bone to the other, between your ribs. Notice if any part of you feels restless in this moment or relaxed. And continue a scan of your body, moving down towards your feet. And just notice if there may be any place of tension. If you find any tension, just invite with an exhale for it to soften just a little bit. And now I invite us to notice our mood in this moment, or our emotional state. And you might find there are layers. There's one thing that is actually driven by something else. And in some cases, you may feel neutral, and ask yourself, what does neutral feel like? the more that we can notice our emotional states in each moment and be familiar with what balance feels like, the more we will notice when we are not in balance. And if you have not done already, let us bring some awareness to our mind, the activities of the mind. As we become our own observer, we can notice if we tend to spend more of our time thinking about the past, thinking about the future, that may be planning or envisioning or worrying, rehearsing. Our thoughts may be in the form of messages, conversations, images. Notice where you get distracted. And now we've had a chance to feel our bodies, to notice our emotional state or mood, and to watch the activities of our mind. And this is a challenging practice. See if you can feel all three at the same time. Hold a little awareness of some aspect of your body, being aware of your mood and watching your thoughts. Now, in a moment, I'm going to invite us to open our eyes and come back to our group. And as we do so, I want you to see if you can hold this awareness of your internal landscape, your heart, mind, and body, even while you become aware of the screen, of others who may be in community with you, or the space around you. So let us start by shifting our focus slightly from inside to noticing if there's any sounds around us. Holding awareness of ourselves even while we hear what is around us. And then gradually, when you feel ready, open your eyes, maintaining still a sense of your body, your heart, and your mind while you become aware of another or the space around you. Okay. What was that like? Could you feel each of your body, heart, and mind clearly in turn as we went? Or did some parts of yourself feel more easily able to be focused on than others? Does anyone have any observations to share? Mhm. That's a great comment. Someone said, I feel like a big sponge filling it all at once. There's a lot to take in a single moment. Anyone else? Did you find when you tried to feel all three of these parts of yourself at the same time that one part kind of dominated? And we may have a default, maybe walking heads all the time in our minds. It may be, though, when we're in the middle of some chronic pain that we can't even think because the pain is significant. And it may be when we get emotionally overwhelmed, like everything else goes out the window, we can't think straight, we aren't even aware that we're hungry or what is happening, but it's just the emotion that's so intense. So the more that we can be aware, the more that we're going to notice when something's shifting, when we actually need sleep or food, or we need some time to sort of process whatever irritation or anger is arising in us, or when we're distracted. And I'm sure we've all been in conversations with people who very obviously were not present with us and paying attention, or were thinking about what they were going to say next, or weren't even listening at all. And our ability to be aware affects the way that we are connecting with others. Someone else said they were very relaxed when they were able to experience all three at once. And it's not easy to do that with others, but I challenge everyone to try this in at least one conversation, to bring an awareness of their mind, heart, and body, just as we did, but also try to balance their attention on what somebody else is saying too, so that you can notice your own impulse to speak, to cut in, or to be thinking about what you're going to say. You know, that's where all of our unconscious activity happens when we're not paying attention. And that's where judgment creeps in. And that's where our overwhelm takes place before we're aware of it. So when we are able to do this more regularly, then we can catch ourselves more easily too. So how do we do this more regularly? I encourage us all to make a commitment to practice, but also there's a way to weave it into your everyday. So first of all, we can establish a daily practice. The average time of a coffee break is 7 minutes. The typical time frame for a snooze button is 9 minutes. And so you could start by setting your alarm clock 9 minutes early, hitting snooze instead of going back to sleep, sitting up right in that moment and breathing, just focusing on your breath, looking at your mind, heart, and body, just observing the sounds around you. And that in and of itself is brain training. Mindfulness work is brain training. It's strengthening our brain, and we get all of the benefits from doing so. But you could also do this in your everyday life. You could tell yourself you're going to take a deep breath before you hit send on an email, just to make sure that is what I want to say. Or every time you hear your phone ring or someone call your name, or every time you walk up steps or go out a door, you take a quick snapshot of what's happening in my mind, heart, and body. Okay, and then go. Or 3 deep breaths. Okay, I'm here. And then move on to the next thing. So there's a way for you to set aside time for this kind of practice that will infuse your life with greater resilience and well-being, and take moments to check on yourself throughout the day so that you can make more proactive choices. Like, am I coping again in this way that doesn't help me? Do I need a break or space from this to reconsider? And can anyone else think of any other ways that you could weave a practice into your everyday? There's lots of apps too that give you little reminders. Or things you're already doing. Walking dogs. Yes, great idea. Great idea. You could bring it into your chores. Not everybody, for example, likes washing dishes, but in a single moment of washing dishes, you can feel the temperature of the water and the nature of the soap. You can have the sense. It's a way of feeling the motion of your the weight of the plate, the motion of the hand over it. There's lots of ways we can bring mindfulness, and there's plenty of unpleasant experiences that we have every day that we don't want to be mindful of. Yes, thank you for the example of emptying the litter box, doing our taxes. There's plenty of things that we don't really want to have to be mindful of, but being able to be with unpleasantness or discomfort, and that might be like the pain in your back while you're sitting there, or it may someday be being present with somebody who's going through something really horrible and you don't know what to do about it. It might be being present with your own feelings of awkwardness. The more that we are able to be fully present with what is challenging is practice for other circumstances that will come our way when presence is what may be most needed. So challenge yourself too. All right, let's talk about grounding. Well, I'll talk about this quickly because I want to give us enough time to do this coherent breathing. Grounding are practices that allow us to just settle ourselves in this moment. Anything that allows us to feel the ground, it helps us come back into a state of balance. So if you just sit and feel your feet, you can feel the four corners, try to feel four corners of your feet, roll your feet around. If you're sitting on the floor, actually touching the floor, going out, touching grass and earth or trees, anything that allows you to feel. Also bending over, any forward bends. It can be just leaning on a table or a chair in your office. It can be an actual stretch where you bend all the way over to try to lean towards your toes. All of those are also very valuable as grounding practices. Likewise, walking very slowly. If you are especially able to get out into nature or a park, or to be able to walk where you can touch earth like bare feet, then that's also very supportive of being able to come back into a place of now, just walking very slowly and feeling everything you can about your feet on the ground. So those are grounding practices, and they can be very helpful, say, in a moment where you're feeling stress about, like, you're going to have to walk into a meeting, or you're about to do public speaking, or you are expected to make a decision. These kinds of things allow you to bring, and slowing your breath, as I said before, a slow exhale, allow you to bring yourself back to a place of presence so that you can really respond consciously instead of being in a dysregulated place. Now, one of the most valuable tools that I've found is simply taking 3 deep breaths. So for most of us, we experience something, we have this emotional charge, and then we react. And we don't give ourselves space to actually choose what that reaction is. We just feel irritated, we snap at somebody. Instead, if you make a practice of taking 3 deep breaths, you lengthen the space between that emotional charge and that response, and it's more likely that that response is going to be one that is chosen and conscious as opposed to an unconscious reactivity. You can do this in a conflict, in an argument. You can do this in regular conversation. You can just say to people, if it feels awkward to pause for 3 breaths, just say, you know what? I just want to lean into that for a second. Let me just see what feels like the right thing to do. Or just, could you hold on a second? I just like to take a breath. Could we just pause for a second? Sometimes that alone can diffuse tension in others as well. So that 3 breaths is often a very powerful tool in transforming reactivity. So the final practice I have to share with you today is something called breath, body, mind. It's a longer practice that normally could take 45 minutes or more. I'm going to give you just a taste of it. But it is a sequence that was developed by 2 doctors of clinical psychiatry, Dr. Richard Brown at Columbia and Dr. Patricia Gerbarg at New York Medical College. And they studied many Eastern practices and distilled their most effective components into this sequence that usually involves some form of movement. We use Qigong, a pace of breathing at a particular pace of 5 breaths per minute, and then a few different meditations that allow us to integrate the experience. And what it does is stimulate that side of the nervous system that is restorative. And over time, it helps to synchronize the respiratory nervous system and circulatory system to a place of coherence, which allows us to regulate our emotions and nervous system, have greater heart rate variability, which is a sign of health, and over months of practice can actually alleviate PTSD. So it's a very powerful, but simple and easy to teach practice that is safe and can be used in a lot of different contexts. And I've used this with survivors of major disaster, such as after Haiti's massive earthquake in 2010, and also with survivors of genocide and war, and in a number of other circumstances with first responders. So let me just tell you quickly what we're going to do, and we're just going to practice it for a few minutes. This pace of breathing is done at a particular time that will be kept with a chime I'm going to play. So you don't have to think about it or count, but we're going to breathe in when the chimes are going up, and we're going to breathe out when the chimes go down. We want to be taking full breaths so that you're filling your chest, not small ones. And we want to try to breathe in and out of your nose. If you find that you are congested, or that is hard, perhaps as well because of recovery from COVID or other respiratory challenges, then go gently. Just do a gentle breath. And you can also sort of purse your lips if your nose is clogged, and just sort of breathe out through your mouth. If you can, close your eyes and make sure you remain still, because any movement will just turn back on the stress response system. So we want to be able to be still and focusing inward, and basically relaxing as you breathe in and out through your nose at this particular pace. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, we're going to give ourselves just a few moments of feeling what this breath can be like. So hold on just 1 second while I get the sound going. Those are the chimes going down. Those are the chimes going up. Breathe in. Breathe out. Relax your face and your shoulders. Breathing in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. we can bring our breath back to our normal pace. Sorry for the abrupt stop. That was supposed to fade out, but it did not. And this is a beautiful practice to practice for 5, 10, even build up to 20 minutes at a time. It's wonderful for sleeping soundly, but it also can bring you to a state of deeper relaxation, which can be followed by greater alertness in your everyday. So I can also share after the session where you can find more information, but breath-body-mind.com is the website for learning about the full practice. And also there should be links there, or I could forward them where you can get those chimes yourself. So now let me go back to sharing the final invitation from our presentation. And that is creating a self-care plan. So now that we've had a chance to understand how stress affects us and what our typical coping mechanisms are, and develop these different practices that can help bring us back into balance, we can build a self-care plan around our mind, heart, body, and spirit, if that is a dimension that resonates with you, where we can make a proactive investment when we notice ourselves falling out of balance. So I invite you to take time after the session to just write down what are the things that can help you deepen the well-being of your mind, deepen the well-being of your heart, and that of your body. So for mind, it might be things like stimulating conversations, or intriguing documentary films, or perhaps it's music. It could be a book that really inspires you, or creative arts of various sorts. Heart could be things like just a good conversation with someone that's dear to you, or time with animals. Body, lots of things that can nourish the body, from good sleep and nutrition to massage and time spent in nature. And so for each, there may also be a spiritual dimension that you can cultivate. But if you make that self-care plan, then when you notice yourself in those typical coping mechanisms, then you, or you can even get yourself a well-being buddy, can help remind you that you have other things that you've committed to do for your own well-being. So this is the final sort of overarching summary that I really hope you walk away with. If you can build self-awareness through this kind of mindfulness practice, and if you have an awareness of the ways you have traditionally coped in ways that did not support your well-being when you experienced stress, your self-awareness that you're falling out of balance, plus these signposts that show you what you're typically doing, a course correction with a self-care plan that's been very well thought out and is holistic in caring for all parts of yourself, and then building in a regular practice of some form of everyday mindfulness or well-being. Can be the breathing and grounding practice, it can be cues in your everyday, it can be something else that you choose to do, going running, yoga, things that help build your sense of well-being on an everyday basis. These components together will help build for you a greater sense of balance, well-being, and resilience. And as you work on yourself and your inner landscape, you will then be able to see more clearly how to connect with, relate to, and build cultures of well-being in your relationships, communities, and organizations. And so I hope I can leave you with a few questions and commitments that you can make for yourself from here on out that may inspire you to invest in your well-being and some commitment on a daily basis. And that I have had the opportunity to share with you and meet what I had hoped to do for this time together, that you will see how we can shift from self-sacrifice and burnout to self-care and resilience, with an understanding of how we cope and how the stress response system operates and how all of these different mind-body practices can serve you so that you can be proactive in investing in your own well-being. So thank you so much for participating in this workshop. I can be reached at gretchen@conscioussocialchange.com if you have questions, if you're interested in some of the practices, and if you might like to experience a workshop or some individual practice like this for yourself and your organizations as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gretchen. Thanks to everyone who attended or who is watching. And again, Gretchen, thank you for sharing this with us. I've definitely have some things that I'll be taking away and hopefully committing to a little better than I have in the past when it comes to mindfulness and being, self-care. Again, Gretchen has shared her email. If anyone has any questions or anything else, you can certainly feel free to reach out to myself or Sarah Sterling. And thanks again. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day.